Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Welcome everybody to episode 2 of our Know-It-All series, our hit Know-It-All series, where our objective is to educate our resellers, our ISOs, our ISVs, so that they're really comfortable with the gateway. They know exactly what the gateway is capable of, its strong selling points, know how to deal with any questions that come up. And this way they can better sell the gateway, better service the gateway, better service their merchants. Our belief is that an educated, very familiar reseller, a comfortable reseller is ultimately a much more successful reseller. So it sort of fits into that, give a man a fish and feed him for the day, but teach him how to fish and you feed him for life. So, the idea isn't don't wait for opportunities to come up, don't wait for questions or issues to happen. Be proactive, get very comfortable with the platform that you sell, and everybody will be more successful, down from the ISO all the way down to the merchant and the customers. Okay, so many of you on this webinar are resellers of AcceptBlue, so are familiar, but for those that are not, welcome. My name is Ben Frisch. AcceptBlue is a white label payment gateway, and we service ISOs, ISVs, banks, pretty much anybody that can get their hands on a VAR sheet and provides merchant services to merchants can resell AcceptBlue. Our core products are a virtual terminal, which is packed with features. We're going to spend a little bit of time just on one of those features today, an open API, and a couple of dozen turnkey plugins and integrations to different softwares. We are an omni-channel gateway, so you can use our platform to service pretty much any type of merchant, but we're definitely stronger in the card not present space in general, and in the B2B space in particular. In those industries, we've attained pretty much the gold standard in the market in terms of gateways. Just a quick note on how this webinar is going to work. Like our first know-it-all webinar session, which was roughly a month ago, we're going to try to keep this as quick and as focused as possible. So the goal is to get the information out there within 20 minutes and then leave 10 minutes or so for questions and answers. The call will be recorded, so it'll be available post session. But I would encourage you to stick around till the end so you can ask any questions and get those live answers. I'm not going to be taking questions during the session. We're going to wait till the end, and that's where we're going to answer everything. As a special bonus for those of you that registered before 12 o'clock today, there will be a raffle of an AcceptBlue Apple EarPods that will take place after the call, and I'll let you know if you're the lucky winner. But regardless if you are or not, you will definitely, gain from this session today, and I think you'll walk away more educated and again more successful reseller and merchant service provider. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get right to it. Today we're going to be focusing on the batches page. Before we actually get there, I'm going to be starting at control panel and batch settings. So there's a couple important things over here that I feel like not everybody's aware of, and really the way batches work depends on the settings that are here on this page. So again, control panel, batch settings. I'm going to go through each of the items here on this page. So the first thing you want to do when you create a new merchant account is set when their batches should close. So the way it works, for those that are less familiar with how credit card transactions work, so it works with batches. So whenever there's a batch of credit card transactions, we close that batch at a specific time, and we'll see how you can set that close time. And then we take the entire batch and we send it off to the processor. That's how card transactions work. So when you first create a merchant account from your ISO portal, you're going to be prompted to set a batch closure time, when their batch should close. And even though it's something you can do in the ISO portal when you create that merchant, we also give the ability for the merchant to modify these settings or change these settings here in the virtual terminal. So when the dropdown says close batches generally in 99% of cases, what's going to be chosen is a specific time, and then you're going to want to choose the time that the batch should close. Usually that batch closure time will be towards the end of the business day of the merchant. For example, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. Another thing to keep in mind is that you want to close the batch early enough so that you can get next day funding, where that's considered today's batches at the processor level. And that really depends on the processor that this merchant account is set up with. For TSYS, generally we see our ISOs setting batch closure time to around 7:30 p.m. And for the Fiserv platforms, for North it would be later, would be 9:30. For Omaha would be earlier, I think would be 3:30. So it really depends on the processor that you have set up with, and you can check with that processor what time you should be closing the batches at. For most merchants, one batch closure per day is going to be sufficient. They're going to have one day, each day is going to be considered another batch, and that's how their business will run. There are situations, for whatever reason, where a merchant can want more than one batch closure per day. They can have certain shifts and they want to, close out those batches per shift throughout the day. So your gateway does allow up to 3 batch closures per day. So you can click on add and then add a new time and then add again. Again, you'll have a total of 3 batch closures per day. One more time, for most merchants, 1 batch closure per day is just fine. Okay, that's step number 1. Step number 2 is expire auth after. This is also something that can get overlooked. So there are 2 types of transactions that could be run in the gateway. You can run it as an authorization only, and then you can run it as a charge. When you run it as an auth only transaction, then at a certain time, the transaction will expire, the authorization will expire. And it really depends on the merchant's industry, how long an auth can sit before it's going to start getting downgraded. And I would encourage everybody to, become educated on that aspect, how long authorizations should be set to exist before they self-expire, and because they're going to get downgraded. But for most industries, the range will be somewhere around 5 to 7 days. So that's probably what you should be choosing for most of your merchants. So let's say 5 days is what you choose. That means that if your merchant runs authorizations in the gateway, auth only transactions, it'll sit there for 5 days, where the merchant can, during those 5 days, capture it, meaning complete the transaction and put it into the batch, or they can void it. If they do nothing, if they don't capture it, they don't void it, then that authorization will expire after 5 days. So it'll just expire, and the merchant will have to run a new authorization for that card. And we'll see more about this on the actual batches page when we get there. Okay, this setting 2 is something that you can set in your ISO portal when you're creating that merchant account. But like many of the settings related to batches, we replicated those settings both in the ISO portal and in the merchant-facing virtual terminal. Next step is send batch reports to and send batch errors to. So most merchants will want an email report, a batch report, every time a batch closes. And by default, that's what's going to happen. When a batch closes, then the merchant's email that we have on file that you set up the merchant account with will receive a batch report with the totals for the batch that just closed. You can add additional emails. So the merchant's default email will be here, but you can add additional email addresses that the merchant wants to receive these batch reports. You can also send to separate email addresses batch error reports. So for whatever reason there's an error with a batch, then at times the merchant will say, or certain, let's say the people on the accounting team or the CEO will say, I don't need to know every time a batch closes, but I do want to know when there's a problem with the batch. So I want to get those batch error reports. So we split out those 2 fields. So you can send regular successful batch closure reports to some email addresses or to one email address, and then use this field to send batch error reports to a completely separate or set of separate email addresses. The next part of the page is what's actually included in that batch report. So some merchants want very little information, just the basics, just the basic totals. Some merchants really want as much information as they can get. So we give all the fields that are available on a per transaction basis, and we allow you to check or uncheck each field. So you can choose, the merchant can choose exactly how much data to receive or not to receive in that batch report. Okay, these are all very important settings related to batches, which is why I started with this step, so control panel batch settings. Now that we've covered this, we can move on to the actual batches page. So in order for us to see how exactly batches work, what I'm going to do is actually begin with a basic transaction, just so we can see the flow from start to finish. All right, so we'll go ahead, we're going to select a customer and put in an amount, and we're going to run this transaction. Okay, that was a typical transaction. You'll notice that we ran it as a charge, not as an auth only transaction. So since we ran it as a charge, it's going to be appearing in their batches, in their current batch. And here in batches is the transaction we just did for $10.40. right? So this is our current batch. You can see that we're set to be viewing the current batch. You can see that the batch will automatically close at 4:50 p.m., which is when my batches are set to close. But notice that there is an option for the merchant to manually close a batch at any time. So if for whatever reason, merchant doesn't want to wait for the auto close, they can just click close batch and close out the current batch. Now, while a batch is still open before a batch has closed, these transactions have not yet settled. And that's important because there's more flexibility to transactions before they're settled as to what we can do with them once they're actually settled, meaning the batch is already closed. So right now, since the batch is not yet closed, the transactions are still captured, not settled, we can do things like adjusting the transaction amount, either up or down. So for example, I can take this transaction, which was $10, and say, actually, they decided to add a tip to the transaction, so it's going to be $11. And I'm going to click on adjust, and now my transaction becomes $11.44. A quick note on adjusting transactions, you can only adjust a transaction one time, not more than once. You can see that for this transaction. Since I've already adjusted it, I no longer have the adjust option. And you need to be careful as to the rules of adjusting because the processors have certain rules with adjusting, and if you can adjust to a significant more an amount significantly more than the original charge, you might risk downgrading that transaction. So just a note to to exercise caution with adjusting transactions. Another thing I can do for a transaction that is still captured and not yet settled is void the transaction. I click on void, and the transaction falls off and never settles. I can of course recharge a transaction. That option is always available. And then the last action over here is what we call queue. This is a unique feature which I haven't seen in any other gateway. So I'm going to spend a minute and show you what this looks like. So when I take this transaction, which is a captured transaction, so as of now, when this batch closes at 4:50 p.m., this $11.44 transaction will settle, will close because it's in the current batch. However, if I click on queue, what I'm essentially doing is pressing pause on this transaction. I'm going to click on queue, and now if we refresh this page, you're going to see that the transaction disappeared. It's no longer in the current batch. And to find it, we're going to click on the queue tab up left over here, queued, and here we have our $11.44 transaction because I removed it from the current batch, the open batch, and I turned it into from a charge transaction to an auth only transaction. So I took a step. So right now it's just an authorized transaction, which means it won't settle. It won't settle when the batch closes because I removed it from the batch. And it's going to sit here in the queue tab until I either void the transaction, capture it, which means put it back into the batch, so it'll settle when the batch closes. If I do nothing, then again, reminder, it's going to expire like all authorizations after a set number of days. How many days? That depends on those settings that we looked at in control panel batch settings. So again, it's going to sit here until it expires, or I void it, capture it. Let's go ahead and capture it. We'll put it back into the batch. We'll come back to our current batch, our open batch, and this is where it's going to be $11.44. It is a unique feature. I'm going to mention one use case, but there are a couple of different ones. One use case is a merchant runs a transaction and then realizes that they don't even actually have the product in stock, or they're not ready to provide the service. So they don't want the customer to see the transaction on their statement because they'd rather wait for that to happen until they actually provide that service or product to the customer. So with other gateways, what the merchant will have to do is void that authorization, void that transaction, and then reattempt a new auth whenever they do ship that product or provide that service. With this gateway, you don't have to do that. The merchant does not have to void the transaction. They can simply take the transaction that they have, queue it, which will just turn it into an auth, and then whenever they do, whenever they're ready to run that transaction fully, to let that transaction complete, they can just put it back into the batch. And then when the batch closes, that transaction will settle. There's one more feature that I want to cover over here on this page, which is batch upload. First, some basics. You can always view batches based on the processor. So First Data, Equinox, Thesis, whatever processors they have set up for themselves. They can also view previous batches. So you can take an old batch and see what was included in that old batch. They can see the ACH transactions, which is separate from card transactions. They work a little bit differently. in terms of batches. So all that is obviously available here on this page. Now let's go to batch upload. So batch upload is a unique feature which can be very useful to some merchants. Most merchants won't have a lot of use for it, but for merchants that do, this can make all the difference. So it's worth spending 2 minutes on what batch upload is. So batch upload means that we give the merchant the ability, the gateway gives the merchant the ability to take a CSV file, like an Excel sheet, with an unlimited number of transactions, and then upload that file to the gateway, and then click process transaction, and the gateway will process all of those transactions on its own. So what they'll do is they'll take our template, which is going to have fields like the amount, the card number, expiration year, expiration month, different headers, and we'll have options such as billing and shipping information, basically as much data as the merchant wants to add per transaction they can using our template. When they're done inputting all that information to that template, they take that file, they click upload, they select that file, and then they'll get a message that it was uploaded, and then they're going to click process transaction, and it'll complete, and the gateway will just process all of those transactions on its own. I'm going to run through 1 or 2 use cases so you have a better idea of when this is applied. So one use case is for merchants that run on subscription payments. So say you have a merchant that has 500 recurring payments, subscription payments across their customers. But this merchant is unique in that the amounts that are run on a recurring basis change from installment to installment. So let's say they run weekly subscription payments. On week 1 is $50, week 70, week 3 it's 20. So it would be hard for them to use the typical recurring feature that's built into the gateway because the amounts keep on changing. So for this merchant, what they can do is just maintain a CSV file with all the customer information, and then once a week, whatever their schedule is, go ahead, change all those amounts on the file, and then upload the sheet to the gateway and process the transaction. That's one use case. Another use case is for merchants that, for whatever reason, need to be using a third-party software to sort of manage their transactions, but they don't want to actually take the payments on that software. So they could just collect information from that third-party software, put it into the template, upload the file, and then complete the transactions. Now, the way to use a batch upload is one of 3 ways. You can, if the merchant has the actual card numbers, they can put that into the file. That's usually not the case. They can also use a token, which if they know how to use APIs, they can generate via APIs. But the easiest way and the most secure way, and the secure way, is to use customer IDs. So for every customer that's stored in the gateway, we're going to go to the customer vault. You can see that there's a gateway generated ID. This is generated automatically by the gateway. Now, if a customer has a stored payment method on file, like this one has, right, then all you need to put into that batch upload is the customer ID that we generated for this customer. And then the gateway will already choose that saved payment method when it's running those transactions. So the merchant does not need to have the full card number. They don't need to generate any tokens. They can just simply take the customer ID, and that will act in place the card number. We'll already get that card number based off of the customer ID. Okay, so that's how batch upload works. It works for card. It works for ACH as well. If you go to the checks tab, you could do the same thing for ACH. And this can be very helpful for, again, specific merchants that need to run huge amounts of transactions but can't use any built-in feature like recurring or stuff like that. They can use batch upload. All right, that covers what we wanted to do today on this session. We're right at the 20-minute mark. Again, I know it was sort of full of information, but that's really the point of these, to just stay focused and fast and get you in and out while educating you to the best of our ability. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing now, and I'm going to open the floor for some questions and answers. Okay, there's someone that wants to know if we offer merchant services. The answer to that is a resounding no. One of the key differentiators to Acceptfluid versus other gateways is that we're a technology company only. We do not service, communicate to merchants. We don't board merchants in any way. We only service resellers who white label our product and then resell it to merchants. There's a question about batch uploads supporting refunds. That is not supported at this time. The only thing batch uploads do is charges, meaning actual transactions, not refunds. There's a good question, April, I like the question. And when using batch upload, if the customer has more than one card on file saved, so customers can have an unlimited number of saved payment methods. So the question is, if they have 10 saved cards, which one will the gateway use when we're running a batch upload? And the answer to that is, it depends. If there's a merchant can mark a card as favorite, there's a little heart icon on every card in the wallet. If they favorite a card, if they mark the heart, then we'll choose that favorite card. If the merchant has never, chosen a favorite card on that customer, then we'll take the first card that was saved on this customer's profile. That's what we're going to choose. Thank you, Dan, for the compliment. Appreciate it. There's a question. Is there a way for batch reports to indicate which transactions were from recurring billing? Absolutely. So one of the fields that you can check off in terms of what should be included in the batch report is the source, meaning where this transaction came from. And if that checkbox is checked off, then included in the batch report will list the source. So transactions that came from the virtual terminal, from the process transaction page, will say process transaction. If they came from recurring, they'll show recurring. So the merchant will be able to see based on that field where the transactions came from. There's a couple of raised hands for the benefit of everybody. I'm just gonna focus on the questions that are submitted via the Q&A. Otherwise, this can get a little bit lengthy. So encouraged to to put those questions right here, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. There's a question about consolidating batch reports from different reports or different processors. Every processor has a separate batch, so it would be separate batch reports. You wouldn't be able to consolidate that. There's a question about post-auth transactions. So I've seen some confusion about this. People use different languages. So just to make it very simple, a merchant can run a transaction as an authorization, just auth-only transaction. If they do that, then in order for the transaction to actually complete, they're going to have to log into obviously the gateway, then the batches pages, and then they're going to go to the Q tab and capture those transactions. Since they were run as authorizations, they won't settle unless they're captured, unless and until they're captured. Or they can run a transaction, and that's typical, that's the default setting in the gateway, to run a transaction as a charge, which is you're running it as a full transaction. It's in the current batch, it'll settle when the batch closes. There is a concept out there called where you get an authorization number from the processor, or there's authorization code, and stick it directly into a gateway. We don't support that, so that's not really relevant to our gateway. So it's really the only two options are, classic authorization or classic charge. There's a question about where we can buy terminals. We have integrated EMV terminals from the Equinox Payments terminal family. I encourage you to reach out to support. We'll give you a sheet where you can see different distributors that carry our integrated terminals. There's a question about, can you automate taking transactions from a queued status, which is again authorization status, and turning them into moving them into the current batch as regular charges? The answer is no. So if you run a transaction as an auth, or if you queue a transaction that was run as a charge, whatever it is, if you have transactions that are sitting as auth-only transactions, in order for them to be included in the batch, they're going to have to be manually captured and put back into the batch. Now, you can select all. There's a way for you to select all to make it easier if you have multiple transactions, but there's no setting that will take a transaction that's sitting as an auth-only transaction and automatically, put it into the batch. There is no such setting. Thank you, everybody, again for attending. We look forward to the next Know-It-All session, which will be in a couple of weeks' time from now. Again, I think these sessions are important. I think you should let any teammates that you have know about them, because the more people on your team attend these sessions, the more people are able to answer questions when merchants call in, and everything just becomes smoother, and everybody just has an easier day. So keep a lookout for those, for the next Know-It-All session. But in the meantime, very much appreciate everybody's time today. Try to get to the questions that you get to today, post-call via direct emails. But in the meantime, talk to you all soon. Have a great time.